Very good morning. We are live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India, India's voice to the world. I'm Abhishek Mahajan. Coming up in the next hour, Zimbabwe's Emerson Mnangagwa wins re-election as president after troubled vote. Opposition rejects the result. Multiple shooting in US as gunman kills 3 himself in racially motivated shooting in Jacksonville. 7 people injured at a mass shooting in Boston. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to share his thoughts in Mann Ki Baat today. It will be 104th episode of the monthly radio program. Star javelin thrower Neeraj Chopra to vie for gold at World Athletics Championship in Budapest, Hungary. DP Manu and Kishore Jena also in the fray. All right, we start the bulletin from the poll results in Zimbabwe as incumbent President Emerson Mnangagwa was re-elected for a second and final term on Saturday. Mnangagwa won 52.6% of the votes. Main opposition leader Nelson Chamisa won 44% of the votes. The result will likely be scrutinized after election observers raised questions over the election environment in the build-up to the vote and pointed to an atmosphere of intimidation against Chamisa's supporters. The election was due to be held on just one day last Wednesday, but voting was extended to Thursday after delays and problems with the printing of ballot papers. Mnangagwa's ZANU-PF party has been in power for more than 4 decades. And the United States has witnessed multiple shooting as a white man armed with a high-powered rifle and a handgun killed 3 black people at a Dollar General store in Jacksonville, Florida on Saturday before shooting himself in what local law enforcement described as a racially motivated crime. The suspect, whom Jacksonville sheriff described as a white male wearing a tactical vest, was not identified. The sheriff said all 3 victims, 2 men and a woman, were black. The authorities believed the shooter acted alone and that before the shooting he had authored several manifestos for media, his parents and law enforcement detailing his hatred for black people. Police described his weapons as a Glock and an AR-15 style rifle with swastikas on it, referring to a lightweight semi-automatic long gun often used in mass shootings.
Jacksonville has suffered the loss of 3 precious lives at the hands of an active shooter. This afternoon, a little after 1 p.m., an individual we have not yet officially identified entered a Dollar Tree in the Newtown area of Jacksonville, outfitted with a tactical vest, armed with an AR-style rifle and a handgun. Then the shooter killed 3 people before turning the gun on himself, taking his own life.
All right, updates from Niger now as 48-hour ultimatum given to France's ambassador to Niger by the country's military rulers on Friday is about to expire. Since seizing control of the government on July 26th, Niamey's new regime has been at loggerheads with several Western powers and the region's bloc ECOWAS. DD India's Isaac Lucando has more from Dar es Salaam.
The clock is ticking for Sylvain Ité, French ambassador to Niger. Apart from his impending departure, his country's influence in the West African nation is also on the line. In recent weeks, there has been growing opposition to the presence of around 1,500 French soldiers stationed there. The soldiers had been helping ousted President Mohamed Bazoum fight a growing jihadist insurgency. Amid growing anti-French sentiment, Niger's foreign ministry has now asked France's representative to leave. However, French authorities remain defiant against the military junta that ordered the diplomat's expulsion. The French foreign ministry maintains that only a democratically elected government would have the authority to remove their ambassador. This latest development follows a threat of military action by French-backed regional bloc ECOWAS if last month's coup is not reversed. The bloc, which has rejected a plan to return to civilian rule in 3 years, says military intervention is still an option. But analysts note that any use of military force in Niger is risky and likely to further destabilize one of the poorest nations in the world. Isaac Lukando in Dar es Salaam, reporting for DD India.
Now, Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu will meet U.S. President Joe Biden on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in New York next month. The UN General Assembly is scheduled for September 18 to 26 in New York. Presidency spokesman said in a statement that Tinubu had accepted the invitation, which was delivered by the U.S. Presidential Envoy and Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. The two leaders are likely to discuss the situation in Niger, where Tinubu, who chairs the regional bloc ECOWAS, is working with other heads of the government in West Africa to find a solution after a military junta seized power. Tinubu, who has embarked on Nigeria's boldest reforms in decades, has called for more U.S. investment in his country and greater cooperation for the defense of democracy in West Africa amid rising coup incidents in the region. Now in Haiti, fleeing gang violence, residents of the Carrefour neighborhood in Port-au-Prince abandoned their homes and set up a camp at a local gymnasium. Despite there are not enough tents nor food for everyone, displacement victims said returning to their homes was an unlikely option. Strong gangs that control vast portions of the country are to blame for acute food shortages, murders, kidnappings and pervasive sexual violence in Haiti. The UN estimates at least 2,439 people have died and about 2 lakh have been internally displaced since the beginning of this year. Now, the share of foreign-born workers in the United States has reached a record high according to data from US labor market. Last year, people born outside the US made up 18.1% of the overall labor force, the highest level since 1996. Indians represent the second largest immigrant group in America after Mexicans and contribute billions of dollars to the US economy. DD India's Sally Patterson reports from New York.
Spectrum analyzer basically sees if there's energy, what the energy is at different frequencies. And
for decades, Indian migrants have been building the infrastructure needed to power the US economy. At this laboratory in Brooklyn, engineers are designing solutions to some of society's most pressing challenges using wireless technologies, from making smartphones smarter to modernizing medical equipment. The Indian labor force is more proficient in English, earns better salaries, and has higher education levels than other immigrant groups in the US.
Many of them had an excellent education, and so they could immediately plug into the American economy, especially in STEM, but in other areas as well, and help the process of pushing their respective fields, whether it's medicine, engineering, and you'll see them overrepresented there.
But it's not just the sciences. Indian immigrants have helped bolster American industries, including the arts, retail and manufacturing, while, of course, keeping everyone well fed.
Let's not forget the political realm. And I think that's been an area where we've seen a number of changes over just the past few years, where there's really a movement across the country to elevate more people of Indian origin into positions of political power. And I think a lot changed for the Indian community when Kamala Harris became the vice president, because as we now know, she is the daughter of two former international students, one of whom was from India. Her mother was from India and her father was from Jamaica.
International students were on the agenda when US President Joe Biden welcomed India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the White House in June. With With Indians on track to become the country's largest foreign student group, the leaders committed to strong ties in higher education and research partnerships. The Biden administration also pledged to make it easier for Indians to live and work in the US, something the nation has relied on throughout its history.
A couple of centuries ago, there were Indian immigrants who came to the US to build our railroads. But then there was a drop in Indian immigration. But just focusing on what's happened since the 1960s, which was the last time that there was comprehensive immigration reform in the US, most Indians have come through the pathway of what we might call skilled immigration in the US.
But advocates stress the flow of labourers is only possible if mechanisms for entry are in place, such as streamlining the H-1B visa process, which is being trialled in a pilot project. From scientific breakthroughs to cutting-edge technology, Indian immigrants have made a colossal contribution to the US economy, generating innovative solutions for generations to come. Sally Patterson in New York, reporting for DD India.
All right, we'll slip into a very short break, but still to come on DD India News Hour. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva says UN Security Council needs changes. Tens of thousands of Israelis took to the streets of Tel Aviv to protest against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's planned judicial overhaul. And 3 Ukrainian military pilots killed when 12-39 combat training aircraft collided over a region west of Kiev.
Your name, Ina Krishnamurthy,
Yes.
it sounds so much like an Indian name.
My grandfather fascinated with Mahabharata, Ramayana stories, so he gave my father's name Krishnamurthy.
The handing over of the gavel by Indonesian President in Bali to Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Of course, it's a fascinating, memorable history.
What does Indonesia think is the biggest challenge in the Indo-Pacific?
We don't want this region to be part of any conflict, not unilateral actions.
How does Indonesia see the Quad partnership?
We see it as a plus.
Wherever news breaks, whatever it takes.
Connecting corners, cutting across continents.
Stories that matter from across the globe.
Accurate, authentic journalism that serves you right. From politics to glamour, from sports to world affairs, with a fusion of aesthetics and substance. Introducing news in a new avatar. Experience the world through a new lens. Stay tuned to DD India for an exciting journey beyond borders.
Namaste India.
Namaste land.
Marhaban ila al-Hind.
Zari India.
Salam India. Namaste India.
Namaskar Bharata.
Mui India. Nahnu Hunud. India. Ma Hindi Hasti. Mung Hindian.
Salam Hindustan.
We are India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Abhishek Mahajan. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has called for changes in the United Nations Security Council during his visit to Angola on Saturday. Criticizing the current UN Security Council members, Brazilian President has asked for reforms in the international body. He also urged for more inclusiveness for other countries in this Security Council.
A ONU
The United Nations in 2023 is far from having the same credibility of the UN in 1945. The Security Council, which should be a figure of peace and calm, is the Security Council that is doing war without talking to anyone. Russia goes to Ukraine without discussing the Security Council. The United States went to Iraq without discussing the Security Council. France and England invaded Libya without passing through the Security Council. This is, the ones who go to war are the countries members of the Security Council. The ones making guns are the countries of the Security Council. The ones selling guns are the countries of the Security Council. That's wrong. We need to understand that we need more countries in the Security Council.
Israeli protesters took to the streets on Saturday to protest against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his coalition government's judicial overhaul in Tel Aviv. This marked the 34th straight week of demonstrations calling for all the planned judicial reforms to be scrapped. Protesters are saying that the proposed changes would significantly weaken the power of the Supreme Court. Earlier in August, Israel's apex court began hearing the first in a series of appeals linked to a judicial overhaul undertaken by Netanyahu, which has set off an unprecedented crisis in the country. Now, Moscow claimed to have thwarted more Ukrainian attacks against the Russian capital as well as regions bordering Ukraine. In Belgorod region, Russia says Ukraine carried out a cluster munition strike, injuring 6 civilians. And in the eastern Ukrainian region of Kharkiv, 2 people were killed and another wounded after Russian shelling hit a cafe in the village of Podoli. DD India correspondent Dasha Charnishova reports from Moscow.
In yet another attempted drone attack against Russia, air defenses intercepted a Ukrainian drone that was approaching capital Moscow early Saturday morning. It fell northwest of the city in Istra district, causing no damage or casualties. Belgorod region, which borders Ukraine, also saw Ukrainian attacks by drones and shelling. Local authorities say cluster munitions were used by Ukraine, injuring at least 6 people. In the meantime, Russia says it has improved its positions on the Kupiansk direction. Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, has claimed that Russian opponents in the West are ignoring signals from Moscow and pushing everyone towards the Third World War. Separately, Russian volunteer formations, groups contributing to the execution of the tasks given to the armed forces, territorial defense units, are now obliged to swear an oath to the Russian flag. The Russian president signed an order aimed at, quote, forming the spiritual and moral foundations for the defense of the Russian Federation. Fighters now must pledge their loyalty to Russia, strictly follow their commander's orders, and preserve constitutional order. Dasha Charnishova reporting in Moscow for DD India.
Now, 2 L-39 trainer aircrafts collided over a region west of Kiev on Friday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky offered condolences to the families of the pilots. During an address, Zelensky said 3 Ukrainian pilots died in the accident in Zhytomyr region in central Ukraine, including a Ukrainian officer, Andrei Pilshovikov. He added an investigation is underway and certainly all circumstances will be clarified. Zelensky is counting on swift training of Ukrainian crews to fly up to 61 F-16 fighter jets promised by his Western allies.
Yesterday, a catastrophe occurred in the sky of the Zhytomyr region. 3 pilots lost their lives. Among them was Andrei Pilshokov, called sign Jews, a Ukrainian officer, one of those who greatly helped our state. Very much so. My condolences to the family and loved ones, to everyone who knew the young men. An investigation into what happened is ongoing. It's too early to discuss details. Certainly, all circumstances will be clarified. Of course, Ukraine will never forget anyone who defended the free skies of Ukraine.
And since Moscow's departure from the Black Sea grain deal, a second ship has sailed from the Ukrainian port city of Odessa for Bulgaria on Saturday. Ukrainian lawmaker Oleksiy Honcharenko said the Liberia-flagged bulk carrier Primus was moving from Odessa to the port of Varna in Bulgaria. Odessa's 3 seaports shipped tens of millions of tons of grains during the war. Since then, missile volleys and kamikaze drone attacks by Russian forces have been directed at the Ukrainian ports. Meanwhile, a detachment of Russia's Navy warships returned from more than 3 weeks of joint patrolling of the Pacific Ocean with Chinese Navy ships. According to Russian Interfax news agency, warships of Russia's Pacific Fleet, together with a detachment of Chinese Navy ships, traveled more than 7,000 nautical miles through the Sea of Japan, the Sea of Okhotsk, the Bering Sea and the Pacific Ocean. During the patrol, the Russian-Chinese detachment passed along the Kuril Ridge. The islands of the northern Japanese island of Hokkaido are known in Russia as the Kurils and in Japan as the Northern Territories and have been at the core of decades of tension between the neighbors. The Russian-Chinese warships also circled part of Aleutian Islands archipelago. Most of the Aleutian Islands belong to the US state of Alaska, but the Commander Islands near the Kamchatka Peninsula are part of Russia. Interfax reported that some of the Pacific Fleet's largest warships participated in the patrol. Romania, 1 person died and 33 were injured after 2 explosions at a liquefied petroleum gas station in Crevedia near Bucharest on Saturday. After the first explosion, the fire spread to 2 tanks and a nearby house, causing evacuations within a radius of 300 meters and a blockage of road traffic. According to the Agency for Emergency Situations, some 25 fire engines took part in extinguishing the fire. 4 people were intubated after suffering severe burns. A second explosion took place at the LPG station on Saturday evening, injuring 26 firefighters. Arafat said the fire had not yet been extinguished and more explosions could happen as a third tank at the site posed a risk. Alright, let's take a look at other stories making news around the world. Thousands of people participated in a march in Washington, D.C. to commemorate the 60th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech in 1963. In March 1963, thousands of people gathered in the U.S. Capitol to call for an end to discrimination based on race, color, religion or gender. U.S. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris will have a ceremonial meeting with march organizers on Monday to mark the 1963 meeting between the organizers of the original march at the administration of the President John F. Kennedy. Detractors and supporters of Chilean President Gabriel Boric gathered in front of La Moneda Presidential Palace in Santiago over alleged corruption cases in the Chilean government. Hundreds of anti-government demonstrators marched to the government palace demanding for the president to resign. Earlier this month, Social Development Minister Giorgio Jackson resigned after accusations that members of his party were involved in a scandal involving multi-million-dollar transfers of public funds. No elections have been held in Gabon to elect the country's president. Gabonese President Ali Bongo is eyeing for a third term. 6 major opposition parties have backed a joint candidate in an effort to challenge 56 years of rule by Bongo and his family. North Korean citizens who were abroad for years following strict border restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic can now return to their country as Pyongyang eased restrictions and approved their repatriation. This comes after North Korea opened its border for passenger travel. The authorities say the returnees will be kept under proper medical supervision in quarantine wards for a week. Alright, time now for another short break, but still to come on DD India News Hour. Japan says test of seawater near the Fukushima nuclear power plant did not detect any radioactivity days after the discharge of treated water into the ocean. Drought hit Panama Canal to restrict access for 1 year, a measure that has already led to a marine traffic jam. And former US President Donald Trump has raised nearly $20 million since he was booked at Atlanta jail.
Welcome to Rajasthan. The